so much for clicking on today's video. If you're new here and this is your first time seeing my face, welcome. I'm Samantha. And if you like what you see thus far, I'd be honored if you hit the subscribe button, ring the bell so you know when I upload, and if you're feeling generous while you're down there, you can give me a thumbs up. If not, you can wait till you get to the end of the video, as long as you get there. And if this is not your first time seeing my face, welcome back, baby. All right, so finally, I have episode 2 of my Makeup for Beginners series. I feel like I've been talking about this episode for like a really long periodic time, and I'm just now getting around to uploading it, so my bad, you guys. But it was some work, okay? You'll see why it took me a while. So anyway, this episode is all about foundation, and I actually go through four coverage levels. That's the main thing. We have, light through full coverage, liquid, cream, and powder, and then different coverage levels. And I show you ways to get flawless foundation even if you're a beginner. So if this is a subject in makeup that you're really interested in, keep watching. All right, so we're starting off with the lightest coverage foundation, and I'm starting out with a primer to prep the skin and to smooth out any texture issues since this foundation is so sheer. Now for color correction, again, because we're using a sheer foundation, I'm using a concealer that is closer to my skin tone and is an actual skin tone color versus a red or an orange or even a peach toned concealer or color corrector, because you don't want to run the risk of that color corrector showing through your foundation, which is very possible when you're working with something that gives such little coverage. And for sheer coverage, I'm talking about like either your really lightweight water-based foundations. This could also include your tinted moisturizers and stuff like that. So I'm concentrating this product in the areas, of course, where I'm darker, and I'm using my foundation brush to preserve as much coverage from that concealer as possible, so I don't have to go back in so much to make sure that everything is covered. So now I'm applying my foundation, and this is the MAC Face and Body Foundation. This is a very light coverage water-based foundation that's actually waterproof and dries down really nicely, but doesn't dry down too fast. Now if you notice, I'm using the same flat foundation brush that I used to blend in my concealer, and I highly recommend these types of brushes, especially ones with synthetic bristles, to apply these types of watery foundations, like really liquidy foundations that have a high water content, because they don't soak up very much of your product. They distribute it across your face and you use less in the long run and all of that. If you try to apply a foundation like this with, say, a beauty blender, your sponge will soak up the majority of your product. So now I'm applying a little bit more of the concealer that I used to color correct, because I kind of lost it when I was applying the foundation. So now I'm going in with my concealer that'll highlight, and this is the Nars Radiant Creamy concealer, and I like to mix and match with coverage levels when doing my complexion. So when I use a sheer coverage foundation, I like to go in with a heavier coverage concealer to make sure that my complexion is perfect, but it doesn't look like I have a bunch of product piled onto my face, because I've balanced out the heavier coverage concealer with the lighter coverage foundation, if that makes sense. So I'm highlighting in very specific areas. Now I'll go over this in the next episode that's all about highlighting and contouring, but if you notice, I'm not blowing out the concealer a whole lot. I'm mostly just keeping it to the center of my face. And I'm basically trying to mimic where the light would naturally hit my face. Now, I am being rather specific with the order in which I blend out those areas. I start with the areas where I need the least coverage. So normally I would do chin, under the, like the upper lip area, and then blend my nose, forehead, and then go back to my eyes. But because I've layered my concealers, I decided to go ahead and just blend out the under eye area because I didn't need as much coverage as usual. So when I opt for sheer coverage, and especially like the more dewy water-based type of foundations, I usually try to do as much as I can with cream products as possible to kind of preserve that natural, fresh face, dewy kind of look. With that being said, I'm opting to use a darker foundation as my bronzing / contour. I'm not really doing like a super contour. I'm saving that for the next episode, but for this I'm mainly using it for the purposes of bronzing and bringing a little bit of sun to my face a bit. Remove the earrings because they do get in the way when you're when you're blending. Now to continue with shaping our face, I am contouring my nose just a little bit. It's less about the shape of my nose and more about bringing back my nose's shape. I've said in previous videos I have a recessed bridge, and when I wear makeup, my nose kind of gets lost a little bit. So you'll notice that I'm concentrating the contour in, like that eye socket, and then just kind of blending it out onto the nose. That's what I suggest for people like me who have flatter noses. So now, keeping with the whole creams and liquids before going to powder thing, I'm using some liquid blush. Now this is a great routine that I would suggest to my ladies with more mature skin, because you're using all of these products that have some emollients to them. They have moisture to them, and it's going to make your skin look more fresh and youthful. So now I'm setting the areas where I highlighted, and I'm doing that part first. And I'm using the Dermablend translucent powder, and I'm doing this with a sponge, with a damp sponge, because even though it's powder, you're still adding a little bit of moisture to your skin while applying the powder, so your face doesn't wind up looking cakey and dry and ashy. Don't nobody want that. So now I'm taking that same powder, very small amount of that same powder, and just lightly tapping all over the face so that everything is locked in place. So now doing a little bit of shaping with powder, and I'm going in with the bronzing shade from this Black Radiance contour palette. And most people use bronzer incorrectly. They'll use it to contour, and it's actually meant to go in areas, not the areas where you're highlighting, but the areas where the sun would hit your face and you would get color first. So now I'm contouring, and I'm going into the hollows of my cheeks. And when I blend contour products on my cheeks, I blend upward because I want the color to hug my cheeks and create lift. So now to highlight, I'm also using that the highlighting shade in that same Black Radiance palette, and I'm going on the high planes of my face, so the high points of my cheeks, underneath my brow bone, just putting a little bit underneath my brow bone so it doesn't jut out. So now I am adding some powder blush on top, and I like to do this because it helps your blush last longer. So now I'm just taking my powder brush with no product and blending. Now moving on to medium coverage foundation, I'm starting out with adding a little bit of moisture to the skin because we'll be using more powder later and I don't want my skin to look dry. So putting on my primer, and this is one of those primers that gives a bit of a boost in terms of glow. So now I've primed my skin and I'm doing some color correction with my orange color corrector. We can afford to use the more unnatural looking color correctors like orange, peach, and red, because when you're using a foundation that has a heavier coverage level, you don't run the risk of your color corrector showing through your foundation unless you use just a god-awful amount, and trust me, you don't need to do all of that. So I'm taking a face blending brush and I'm going back and forth. I'm alternating between patting to preserve coverage and kind of sweeping or going in circular motions to buff. So now we're applying foundation. Don't be alarmed. This is the foundation that has a much darker dry down. But I'm using a flat top kabuki style brush to buff in the foundation and to get the most coverage out of this foundation without having to apply a ton of product. The brush really does matter when applying your foundation. If you're using a sponge, it gives you more of a luminous sheer type of finish, and if you're using a brush like what I was using, it gives you more of a full coverage type of effect. So now I'm layering my concealers, and this one's more of my skin tone shade, and I'm layering them because my brightening concealer is it's quite bright. So if I layer it, I don't need to use as much to brighten, and then it's not such a stark difference. So I'm going in all of the areas where the light will hit the face the hottest, and when I say hottest, that's kind of it's a film production term, but basically it's where the most light is going to hit your face and it's going to be the brightest. So I'm highlighting in the center of my face, and I'm blending my concealer out in the order of the areas where I want the least to greatest amount of coverage. So I'm blending out my under eyes last because I want the most coverage in that area. Now, when blending out your concealer, you definitely want to make sure that when you get up under the eye, you want to look up towards the ceiling and blend that out, because when you do this step right here with your powder, you don't want to set any creases, because once you lay that powder down, it's not going anywhere. No matter how you try to spray your face to re-wet it, it's not moving. So you want to make sure you get rid of any creasing or anything before you lay your powder. So I'm applying this setting powder. This is the Dermablend translucent setting powder in all of the areas where I highlighted first before going in with my powder brush and applying a very, very thin veil of that same powder all over to lock everything in place so it doesn't slide around. So for sculpting / bronzing, I'm not using this bronzer to contour, because you notice I'm actually putting that bronzer on my cheeks as well. I'm bringing a little bit of color back to my face with the bronzer, and now with this powder blush, because blush, it adds health. I know some people don't like blush, they think of Pennywise, whatever, but blush adds health back to the face. And now I'm adding glow by using this powder highlighter by Becca, and I'm being very strategic in the parts of my face where I'm highlighting. So I'm turning around to show you guys the final look. Now moving on to powder foundation, and I'm applying a silicone based primer. This one is by Tatcha Soul, the No Problem primer, and now I'm doing a little bit of color correction. But the reason why I used a silicone based primer is because I want to give the skin as much slip as possible, because this is a powder foundation, so we want it to go on as smooth as possible. Now, color correcting in all of the same areas around my mouth, under the eyes, and areas where I have hyperpigmentation, and using a fluffy face blending brush to blend all of that out. Now when you're blending out color corrector and under eye concealer, you want to make sure that you always blend into that inner corner, because by covering that, you brighten the whole eye. So now I'm going in with my concealers, and you want to do all liquid and cream products before your powder. So since we're doing a powder foundation, you want to do these steps before applying your foundation. So I'm blending that concealer out, which was the Cover FX Power Play concealer. I'm using a fluffy duo fiber blending brush. Now when you hold the brush closer to the brush head, it gives you more of a full coverage, buffed in type of blend, but holding the brush further down and away from the brush head gives you more of an airbrushed type of blend. So now I'm brightening and just going in with a very teeny tiny bit, because this e.l.f. Hydra Camo concealer is extremely full coverage. And again, just doing like an airbrush type of blend with that concealer, and kind of blanking out my eyelids with that Cover FX concealer, because my eyelids are a little bit darker than the rest of my face. So now using that same concealer brush, and I'm applying a thin veil of translucent setting powder under my eyes and on my eyelids. And now I'm taking that same powder and I'm setting the color corrector, because since we're using a powder foundation, and as you see now, I'm using a buffing method with applying it, you don't want your color corrector to move. Even though that particular color corrector, it does dry down, if you don't set it with a powder, it will still move around a little bit. So you want to make sure you set those areas first. So now I'm using a duo fiber kabuki style brush to buff in that foundation so that it looks the most like skin. So now I'm taking a bronzer, this one is by Nars in the color Casino, and I'm just placing that on the areas where I want a little more color. So putting some on the forehead to kind of shape it a little bit, and I put some on my cheeks to start bringing back a little bit of dimension and life. So now I'm using a highlighting blush, this is by Becca, and I'm applying that because I want to limit the amount of matte powders that I have on my face. So now I am highlighting and using the Becca highlighter in Opal and just going on those key parts of the face to bring about a glow. And now, because we use so much powder, I am going in with the Fenty Beauty Baby What It Do spray to add back some moisture to the skin so it doesn't look so powdery. I may have gone a little overboard. Now, last but not least, we're doing our full coverage routine, and I'm starting out with a primer. Now, this routine, things are going to be done a little bit differently, but you'll see. So we're going in with that Tatcha primer, and you want to make sure everything is blended super, super well. All right, so we are gonna go right in with our foundation, and we're using a thicker cream foundation. This is the Becca Ultimate Coverage. And so the way that I like to apply my full coverage foundations, I like to start in the center of the face and blend outward, because you're never really going to need coverage unless there's, an extreme situation or a out of the ordinary situation where maybe you broke out on the edge or the rim of your face or something, but usually you need the most coverage around, like in the center of the face. So I work in small sections because this foundation's dry down, baby. Woo chow. So I work in small sections, and I like to lay the foundation first and then blend with the Beauty Blender. You still maintain that full coverage, but using a damp sponge is going to make your full coverage look as realistic as possible. Now you may have noticed that I have not done a stitch of color correction before using this full coverage foundation, and that is because when using a full coverage foundation, you really want to limit the products that you layer with that foundation. So because you're getting so much coverage, you don't need to color correct with full coverage foundation. So color correction in this case is an unnecessary step. Now moving on to highlighting, you'll notice that I am being rather conservative with the amount of product that I'm laying down in the areas that I want to highlight. And again, like I said with the color correction, you want to limit the amount of product that you layer with a full coverage foundation so that your skin doesn't look cakey and, downright congested. So because I don't need any coverage, I'm just looking for brightening, I don't need as much product as I normally would with a lighter foundation. Now, a major key to making sure that your full coverage foundation looks as natural as it possibly can is by making sure that everything is as evenly blended as possible. You want everything to be seamless. And yes, you want that anyway, but other types of foundation are a little more forgiving. Like your light coverage foundations, they're a little more forgiving than full coverage. Because full coverage foundations are much thicker than their counterparts that give lesser coverage, whatever products you put on top of it, it's going to cling to the foundation. So if it's unblended, it's going to be more exaggerated than it would on top of, say, a face and body type of foundation. So you want to make sure that everything, concealers, if you use a cream blush or whatever, you want to make sure that everything is evenly blended before laying down your setting powder. Because once you lay down that setting powder, it's a wrap, everything is locked in place. So make sure there are no creases before you set as well. So now I'm going in, it's actually a light layer, but I'm applying it with my blending sponge to make sure that I press that powder into that cream to make sure that everything is locked, all layers are set, and you won't have to worry about anything funky happening with your foundation. Being a little more liberal around the mouth because it moves a lot more. And so I'm just pressing that powder into the areas where I highlighted so that they still stand out. Now I'm taking an even lighter layer of a skin colored setting powder. This one is by Danessa Myricks, and I'm setting the outer parts of my face, but also taking that brush over those highlighted sections again to make sure that everything is blended. So now I'm going to do a little bit of bronzing, and this is from the Black Radiance palette, and I'm going on my cheeks a little bit, and you'll notice I'm bringing that color up, sweeping in an upwards direction, and taking a little bit on my forehead to add color and dimension before going in with my blush. And I'm using the Colored Rain blush duo from the Power collection, and I'm keeping that color mostly on the apples of my cheeks to give a more youthful, healthy type of glow, and highlighting on the tops of my cheeks, again that part of the area where the under eye meets the top of the cheekbone, and on my brow bone. Look at that. Look at that glow, baby. Woo, child. That was only one layer. That highlighter is the truth. Anyway, I'm going on the tops of my cheekbones and under the brows. I personally suggest using a highlighting powder for the brow bone versus using a shimmery eyeshadow, because eyeshadow can be a little overpowering, a little overwhelming, because there's more pigment to an eyeshadow. So now just bringing back the shape of my nose and, you know, reminding my reflection that I have a bridge. So using that contouring powder from the Black Radiance palette, I'm concentrating the color in the bridge and going into the socket of my eye and blending into the head of my brow. Now this blending brush has no product on it, and I'm just blending that line down because remember, I said this in like an older video, but you don't want to see your contour, you just want to see the effects of it. So you don't want people to actually be able to see that you got, you know, a couple of brown stripes on the sides of your nose, but you want people to see whatever the effect that you wanted from your nose contour. That's all you want people to see, just the effect. So I'm just blending those lines down so it's not harsh. And you can see the shadows on the sides of my nose. So now bringing back a little bit of hydration and freshness to the skin with a skin mist. This is not a setting spray. This is just a moisturizing, hydrating mist to make the skin look more natural. And this final look is already up on my channel. It's a couple videos back.
And that's it for today's video. I hope this episode was helpful to you. I also hope that it wasn't too long. But above all, I hope that it was helpful for you, because that is the whole purpose of why I made it. Any questions that you may have, go ahead and drop them below, because I love talking to you guys. And all the products that I use, and I'll group them by each video, but all the products that I used in today's video, they'll all be linked down below. Not linked, but it'll all be listed down below. Episode 3 is going to be all about highlighting and contouring. So you might have noticed that each routine was not completely absent of highlighting contour, but it wasn't like sculpting focused. It was light sculpting. I just wanted to keep it beginner friendly and just, you know, slowly introduce each step. So the next episode will be about highlighting and contouring, and I've already got that shot, so it won't take as long as it took for episode 2 to come out. So yeah, if you haven't already, go ahead and give me that thumbs up. This is the time to do it. If you ain't do it at the beginning of the video, girl, this is the time, you know, just go ahead and click it. And also, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I would be honored to have you as a part of my tribe. And click the notification bell and switch it to all so you know when I upload. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.